I'm Shelley Jones, Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement at Missouri State University. The Alumni Association is the organization through which Missouri State students continue their connection with MSU when they leave the university. The Alumni Association is a non-dues paying organization, so all of our alums are viewed as members. So if you are new to our BearTalks webinar series, these are monthly professional development sessions now available in a virtual format. So today's topic is career and personality assessments. Your personality is one factor that is important to consider when you're exploring which careers may fit you best. Career and personality assessments evaluate your strengths and weaknesses, values, interests, skills, and preferences. Whether you are trying to figure out a future profession, make a career transition or shift, become more self-aware, or learn ways to just relate better with people, these assessments can prove helpful. To discuss these topics further today, we have three amazing MSU alums on our panel. Joining us, we have Michelle Oakes, Carmen Reynolds, and Mike Wood. So welcome all. For today's format, we will be visiting with each panelist individually, and then we're going to bring them all back together for our general Q&A portion. So let's get started with Michelle. If we can go ahead and have Carmen and Mike. Okay, yep, they're gone. So the attention's all on you, Michelle. So let me tell you a little bit about Michelle first. She graduated from MSU in 1999 with a master's in educational administration. She also has her doctorate in educational leadership and policy analysis from the University of Missouri. Michelle's worked in higher education for over 24 years as a leader in student services. She currently works with students on development and outcomes of their healthcare programs at Carl Sandburg College in Galesburg, Illinois. Michelle's also a certified career coach and has training in administering the StrengthsQuest assessment and Myers-Briggs inventory. So thank you for being with us today, Michelle.
Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everyone.
Well, before we get started, let's get a better feel for who is joining us today on this webinar. If we could have all the attendees, please answer the following poll question. Are you currently thinking of a career change? Yes or no? We'll just take about 15 seconds here. And then Candace, our other assistant director here in alumni relations, she's helping us out on the back end. She's going to pull up the results. All righty, let's see what we have. Oh, so 58% currently thinking of a career change and 42%. Well, great. All right, well, thank you for sharing that. That will help us with guiding this discussion, and we know who's out there watching. All right, so let's talk about the two assessments that you work with Michelle, StrengthsQuest and the Myers-Briggs inventory. Are these considered more personality assessments?
Yeah, so let me give you a little bit of background on each, and I think that will kind of separate the two. So the Myers-Briggs, that's probably one that people are more familiar with. That one's been around since the 60s, and a lot of organizations use that when there wasn't a lot of other assessments out there, including college campuses. So you may have been exposed to that when you were a student. That is a personality-driven test. That is really to assess how you interact with and see the world based on your personality skills. So it does not measure your character, your ability, or your traits. It really focuses on your personality and your approach to the world. I know we're going to get into a little bit later about different types and how it works, but that's just kind of the summary of that one. It separates you into 16 types based on your answers to 4 specific areas that it's scoring you on. StrengthsQuest, on the flip side of that, is really focusing on your strengths. So it's less about your personality and more about the strengths you possess in your work environment. It really looks at your natural patterns of the ways that you do your work and the ways that you look at things and interact with people. The Strengths Quest will separate you into 34 different talent areas, and it will score you on those. It really focuses on the concept of studying what is right with people instead of focusing on weaknesses and how to improve your weaknesses. It takes what you're already good at and tries to help you build on those strengths. And I think there's a statistic that says about 85% of Fortune 500 companies have used Strengths Quest with their employees, and utilizes it not as only individuals, but also how teams work together.
Great. Let's actually talk about that a little bit more. So what are the best ways to use these assessments? For example, let's talk about Strengths Quest. What's the best way to use Strengths Quest?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good one to use in a lot of areas of your life, certainly in your career or working with other individuals, because again, it's really going to focus on what you're good at and what you contribute to an organization or a team. So it definitely applies to your work environment, which is why I think a lot of organizations have used that to not only figure out how individuals work best, but how teams can work together to better the organization. But because it's something that shows your strengths, it can be really used in any area of your life. You may use it in your personal life. You may use it in how you manage your family, because again, it really shows what your strengths are. So it's really a good tool to just know yourself across the board. And for those of you looking at a career change, if you've never been exposed to any of these assessments we're going to talk about today, I think they're beneficial for you in looking at a career change to really identify what your strengths and what your personality areas are that are going to contribute to that new career or even through an interview process.
And then what about team development? How do you see these being used in that area?
Yeah, we've used them a lot of teams that I've worked with in higher ed over the years. And Strengths Quest also, as a side note, has a specific one for students. So especially if you're working in an environment with high school students or college students, there's a different version that's tailored to students. And so we've used these a lot through my work in higher ed, working with teams, because it really helps us figure out what strengths are on the team. And similar with Myers-Briggs, even though it's more personality driven, you can pull out what people are good at and how they respond to other people. So when you're thinking about working in a team setting, it's really good to understand where other people are coming from and how you might best intersect with them and use them on the team so that you all can contribute to the highest level for the organization.
Is one of the two assessments, the Myers-Briggs or Strengths Quest, is one of them better than the other? Should an individual take both of those?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that one is better than the other because they're looking at different aspects, your personality versus your strengths. I think depending on how interested you are in career assessments, it's fun to have both of them kind of in your arsenal. But I think depending on what you're planning to do, if you're just trying to understand your personality more, I think Myers-Briggs is a good fit for that. If you're looking at career development or career change, I think Strengths Quest is good in being able to showcase yourself in the best light by understanding what you could contribute to a job.
And you may have answered this, but for someone who's thinking of a career change, how might these two personality assessments be beneficial? Anything more to say on that?
Yeah, I would just say, if you're looking for a complete career change, I think it's good because Strengths Quest especially will help you understand areas that you're good at, and then you can apply those to particular jobs. So if you're looking at a completely different career field, you can see if those skills would be applicable. I think in general, just interviewing and preparing yourself for careers, it just helps you have a better understanding of who you are and where you're coming from.
So where can you take these assessments? Can you find them online for free? Do you need an outside facilitator involved? What are your recommendations?
Sure. Yeah, if you, they're both online, and in the resources that Shelley will send out, I put links to both of their websites, so you can just review it further. You can take it as an individual. You can go on the website and just sign up to take it. They both have a minimal cost to it, but it's reasonable to get the information. Some of your college career centers, and Mike can talk to this, may offer them at little to no cost. A lot of our college students would take Myers-Briggs for free, and then the Strengths Quest, again, a minimal cost. You can certainly take them on your own. If you work in an organization and you're interested in having teams take them, there is information on those sites about signing up as a group. And then you can just take it and take the information and read through it and move on. Or there are facilitators that are trained to help a team or even help an individual kind of process the information and figure out how it applies to your group in the best way. So you could go one step further and work with kind of a certified trainer.
Gotcha. And with Strengths Quest, can you tell us, you said that there's different themes. Can you tell us kind of a little bit about like, what are these themes? What are a few of the themes you might find on Strengths Quest?
Yeah, so with Strengths Quest, there's 34 talent themes is what they call them. And then they separate those into 4 different domains. So it's really looking at how you approach your work. So some of the things that come to mind are if you're a strategic planner, if you're an ongoing learner, if learning is important to you. It also looks at empathy. It also looks at your charisma and if you're drawn to people and your personality and how you interact with people. So there's a wide variety within those 34 themes. When it scores you, and you may have heard this if you've been exposed to strength, it exposes you to your top 5. That's really, it scores you on all 34, but your top 5 is what people speak most often to. And those are the ones that are going to be your strongest, the things that you're really, really good at that you can contribute.
Okay, and speaking of those top 5, oh, well, first of all, before we get to that, tell me, how reliable is the Strengths Quest test?
Yeah, Strengths Quest is very reliable. It's valid, and reliability has been proven over time. And in fact, they really discourage you from taking it over and over in your lifetime, because really the results are going to come out pretty close to the same. There may be just a little bit of altering in the top 5 if you're at a different place in your life, but really the reliability is there to the extent that you would only need to take it once, and it's probably not going to change over time.
Oh, you just took my next question. So that was great. You answered my question. Yeah.
Yay.
Is there a certain time in life that it would be better to take this? You said just kind of take it once. Is there like early in your career, mid-career? What would you recommend?
I think, like I said, I think we give it to a lot of college students. So I think even as you're starting to look at starting off a career and really identifying what you're good at. But some people don't take it until they're in their first company and they do it, as a team's activity. So I think at any point, it's still very interesting to be able to kind of assess your personality in a way that you might not have looked at it before.
All right. So now let's talk a little bit more about Myers-Briggs, that assessment. And then you mentioned that there were like 16 personality types. Can you tell us, I think probably a lot of the viewers are more familiar with that one, but we may have some who aren't. What are some of those types and what do they mean?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So yeah, that one's probably more familiar to folks. So there's 4 different areas with Myers-Briggs that it's going to judge you on when you take that assessment. So, and a lot of those areas are going to be familiar to people. So they're going to look at if you're an introvert or an extrovert, and really it's scoring you on a spectrum of that. So you may be a little bit of both, you may fall in the middle, or you may be very strong on one end or the other. And that's really the way you see or interact with the world. The second level is judging or perception. That's really how you organize things. That's how you decide if you're looking at how you're going to manage your life a little bit. And again, it's on a spectrum. They look at if you're a thinker or a feeler. So that's really if your decisions are logical or if they're really focused on how people are going to feel about things. And then sensing or intuition are the last 2. And that really is it's how you take in information. Do you focus on it and just take the information at face value, or do you interpret the information and try to find meaning in it? So it takes those 4 areas and it scores you on those, and it identifies a type for you, and it's part of the 16 types. So for me in particular, my type falls, you get the 4 letters from those 4 areas. So it's an ISFJ. So I'm an introvert, I'm a sensor, I'm a feeler, and judging sounds bad. Judging means I'm a type A personality. It means I'm very organized. It doesn't mean your original definition of judging. So it puts you in a type category of those 4 letters within 16 different types. And then it shows you how you interact with other people of those different types. And so again, you'll see an example of that on the follow-up materials that Shelley will send out. So if you have more interest in that, you can dig a little deeper to those websites.
Great. And is there a risk of test takers feeling like they're being put into a box? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. When Myers-Briggs first came out and people really started using it, I think people were kind of putting other people in a box, like, oh, you're an introvert, so you don't understand. But I think because these assessments have really evolved, people have a good understanding of not trying to pigeonhole themselves or other people that they're working with, but really trying to use them to understand themselves and how they interact with other people. So I think there's a lot more value in them now and less opportunity to kind of be put in a box. And Myers-Briggs really promotes that there is no one perfect type. All types are equal. It's just a matter of how you manage the world and interact with people.
And I think the thing that you said earlier about how there's a spectrum. And so I think that that's really important. It doesn't mean that you're not a feeler, that you have no feelings. It just,
right.
It just is. And do you see, if somebody were to take the test again, that maybe the spectrum, where they are on the spectrum, may move somewhat more so than their letters on the Myers-Briggs?
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I think especially with Myers-Briggs, you can fluctuate in that one a lot more than Strengths Quest. So depending on the type of work you're doing, you may be forced more so into being an extrovert. And so when you answer the questions, you may be in that mindset when you could still be an introvert even in your home life. So that spectrum or that range can really change over time depending on what you're doing.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you for your insight, Michelle.
Sure.
We are going to move on to our next panelist, Mike Wood. So a little bit about Mike. He graduated from Missouri State in 1993 with a bachelor's in psychology, followed by a master's in counseling in 2001. He then went on to obtain his doctorate as well in educational leadership and policy analysis from the University of Missouri. Mike serves as the Assistant Director in Career Counseling at the Missouri State Career Center and has over 20 years of experience in higher education. The Career Center assists students and alumni, we're going to talk about that, with all aspects of the career development process. The Career Center utilizes 3 tools as part of the career counseling process, and these include the Cooter Journey Career Planning System, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which Michelle spoke about, and the Strong Interest Inventory. So thank you for joining us, Mike.
Well, thanks for having me. I didn't realize until you were just doing the intros that Michelle and I went to the same graduate program, and I'm a fellow ISFJ, by the way, Michelle. So I thought that was a funny coincidence.
All righty. So can you provide a brief overview of some of the programs and services offered to both MSU students and alumni at the Career Center?
Great. Yes, that's the first thing I wanted to get out there is that alumni have free access to our services. Some institutions do charge alums, but we do not. So we're very thankful we're able to provide that service. When you think about the Career Center, I mean, of course, immediately job-related things come to mind. So assisting both students and alumni with job search, building those job search skills, interview skills, resume assistance, mock interviews, all the things that will prepare both students and alumni to have an effective job search. We definitely have the philosophy that since career development's a lifelong process, especially now, when people tend to work in much shorter periods of time, that we need to teach the skills so that they can apply those no matter whether they are in their career journey. So that's a big piece. And then the piece that I'm kind of responsible for is the career counseling function. So we work with a lot of students as well as alumni who are changing careers to kind of help them evaluate, their interest, personality, values, all of those types of things. So yeah, that's a couple of the functions. We do some other things as well, but those are kind of the big ones.
Great. And then are there any of the career programs that you currently do that you feel might be especially helpful for our MSU alumni to take advantage of? And is there a cost to them, or do they need to live here in the Springfield area to be able to receive that support?
Yeah, no, there's no cost to alumni to take our assessments. They don't need to live in the area, especially in the era of Zoom appointments being the norm right now. So yeah, they're welcome to take our assessments, to meet with the career resources specialist to kind of work through that. I would say that there seems to be a trend of seeing more alumni. I think the pandemic has given a lot of people a lot of time to reflect. And I think a lot of folks are maybe thinking about making some changes, and they're just maybe not sure how to do that. And so we can certainly help with that process.
Okay, great. I know we had a pre-submitted question where we had a young man who was talking about filling a gap in a resume that they hadn't worked in their area of study for a while. And is that the type of assistance that that individual might be able to work with a professional at the Career Center to kind of help them with their resume and address that a little bit better?
Yeah, I think, it's important to be upfront about any particular gaps that you have in your work history. Sometimes people, in the academic term, would be taking a sabbatical for some time off to pursue some personal interest or something like that, if you're fortunate enough to be able to do that. I think by nature, a lot of times we're used to looking at chronological resumes. And if there's a big gap or a repeated pattern of gaps, I feel like you have to explain that. If you took some time off to raise a couple of kids, hey, that's perfectly valid, legitimate thing to do. Just, you would need to be prepared to explain that if there are questions.
Okay. Well, I know that many MSU alumni out there may not realize that the Career Center services are still available to them. So just for curiosity's sake, let's launch a poll. And if you are an MSU alum, only an MSU alum, please answer this. Please respond to the question, have you used the Missouri State Career Center since graduating? Just a yes or no. We'll just take just a few more seconds here to get that. And then we're very curious what the results are going to be here. For 13%, 88%. Who have not. So Mike, do those results surprise you?
Hey, I'm happy about the 13%, but I suspect some of my colleagues on this call and probably answered that. I don't know. But no, I think, we hate to hear stories. A few months ago, we took a call from someone that had paid several $100s for someone to basically help them develop their resume and job search materials. And, when I said, it's like, hey, we would have helped you do that for free and probably done a better job. Person was really shocked, but it just never had occurred to them. They didn't use the Career Center when they were a student here. And so of course they didn't think about it until a friend or something told them about us. So we try to get the word out, but we're not always successful at that.
All right. So when it comes to one's career path, what is the most common myth or misperception, Mike?
Couple of thoughts. I guess one, and this is really tough to convince current students and recent alums. I would say the myth that whatever degree you graduate with determines your lifelong career path. And the reality is that within a few years after graduation, there's often little to no relationship to your job and the degree you earned in college. And current students especially aren't convinced by that. And I share with them, hey, when I was a student here, I was pursuing a degree in psychology. I had a very narrow idea of what I could do with that. But the reality is, typically degrees like that are broad. You can do lots of different things. It's a lot more determined by your work experience, the connections that you make professionally, those types of things. So I think just helping people to be open to that idea. And then the second thing, and I know Carmen will touch on this as well, the idea that your career path is this perfectly designed, intentional, linear process. I think a lot of times recent alums feel like you have this very detailed, specific plan, but yet no one I've ever talked to has that experience. To use myself as an example, even being in career services, I was working full time. I came in on my lunch hour. I wanted a job at the counseling center, but the career center at that time was right next door. So I dropped off a resume. The director at the time called me in, interviewed me, and offered me a job on the spot, which is not a way that I would recommend doing that. But that altered my career trajectory. I never thought about working in higher ed really, or especially career services until that experience. So I think, being open to just kind of random possibilities, things that might affect your, your career trajectory. But again, that's a tough sell to recent alums.
Right. So I know the Career Center uses a couple of different assessments there, the Cooter Journey Career Planning System, and then also the Strong Interest Inventory. And then also the Myers-Briggs, which Michelle had talked about. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about those other two assessments and what they can provide?
Sure. Yeah, the Cooter Journey is the kind of newest edition. We've used that for a couple of years. That's going to look at things like interest. So there's a little bit of overlap, for example, between that and the Strong Inventory, but it's good overlap. We look at skills confidence. So the Cooter Journey says, hey, I'm interested in these, 3 different areas. How do I feel my skills are as it relates to those areas? And obviously we would like to see a lot of overlap. And to some extent that happens a lot, but occasionally I've worked with a student or something that had a very distinct set of interests, but very little to no overlap with their skills. Now, skills are something that can be learned, but that's kind of a red flag for me if their interests are that much in alignment with, with their skills. And then that third piece, values as it relates to the world of work, is something that I think is often overlooked. I find that to be less the case with alums who have been out in the working world for 15 years. They know how important their values are in the day-to-day satisfaction. But like my number one value was variety in terms of the workplace. And if I were to work in a job where I did the exact same thing the same way every day, that would not be a happy place for me. So I've always tended to be drawn towards jobs that have that creativity and variety.
And you had mentioned that there's no cost for students or alums to take these assessments through the Career Center. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Our budget pays for those. I don't think I touched very much on the Strong Inventory. I wanted to take just a couple minutes to talk about that. So again, we use the Myers-Briggs, the Strong Interest Inventory, and the Cooter Journey suite of the 3 assessments, kind of to form that complete picture. So the interest inventory, the Strong Interest Inventory, is definitely one of my favorites. And I just want to highlight that, as the name suggests, it is intended to measure your interests. So it does not look at your skills, abilities, or aptitudes. Sometimes people that take the assessment think it's some kind of, aptitude test or something. That's definitely not the case. The version that we use takes most people 25 to 30 minutes to complete. So it isn't something that you're spending multiple hours doing. It's built on psychologist John Holland's theory, which is backed by more than 80 years of research into how people of similar interests are employed and what motivates them in the workplace. It gives you a description of 6 occupational themes. And the way I think of it is work personalities is one way. So, an example of one of those themes, there's 6 of them, but my number one is social. And For example, people with that as your theme are attracted to professions such as counseling, teaching, a lot of different helping professions. And that's always an interesting contradiction because like in the Myers-Briggs, as Michelle is that my I, introverted, I'm probably I think a 29 out of 30 on that. Yet social is my number one interest area, but I much more prefer the small group or individual interaction as opposed to large groups. So, I'm glad the 49 people on this call aren't all in the room right now. I would get through it and would be fine, but it's just not a preference. In terms of how we use the interest inventory, whether it's with students or alums, really the purpose of that is to kind of help them identify some areas to explore and really as a starting place for their conversation. I always tell people, we have no magic assessment that will spit out one perfect career that you're going to do for the rest of your life, but we can usually identify several things for you to look into that might be a good fit and can kind of help you make those connections. And then lastly, it looks at some things called your personal style scales. It looks at learning preferences, lectures and books versus hands-on learning, a preference towards, long-term education versus short-term training. Those can all make big differences, whether you prefer to work in a team or alone, all those types of things, but it'll even suggest majors of interest. So if you're thinking about coming back for another degree, hey, here's some majors that you might want to consider, but it definitely does not tell you what you should major in. They're just merely suggestions for things to explore. And then just to circle back for just a second to the Cooter Journey, that one's a very short one. Each of those individual sections are 5 to 7 minutes, but yet they're all super helpful. And I know Shelley will be sending a resource sheet follow-up, but just so you all know, you can access that one through the Career Center website. And there is we pay a licensing code, but we put that code right on the website that you can just copy and paste, and you would have access to those results immediately. Whereas to make an appointment with one of us for the Myers-Briggs and Strong, you would need to meet with us for a follow-up visit before we release those assessment results to you.
Great. And in the follow-up email that you will be getting, we'll also be having the contact information for the Missouri State Career Center. So if you are an alum and you are interested in making an appointment with them to talk about some of the things that Mike's been visiting about, that will tell you how to do that. So, or the phone number will also be on there if you need assistance with that too. So, great. Well, thank you for sharing with us, Mike. It's time for us to move on to our next panelist. We have with us Carmen Reynolds from Boeing. So let me tell you a little bit about Carmen. She graduated from Missouri State in 1997 with a degree in public relations and communications. She also has a master's with a focus in marketing from MSU and the University of Phoenix. She serves as the Senior Director of Leadership and Professional Development at Boeing in St. Louis, Missouri. Carmen and her global team are responsible for managing professional development, leadership and executive development curriculum, mid-career and specialty programs, culture, and the Boeing Global Learning Center. That is.
I'm so tired, Shelley.
I know, I just got worn out just reading them. She's traveled to nearly 25 countries and managed teams with members around the world. She's certified in Myers-Briggs and Hogan assessments and is working on her executive coaching credentials. So thank you for being with us here today, Carmen. I think I just got reading all of that. So, so before we get started with Carmen, let's go ahead and launch one more poll. This poll is for everybody. How would you define your current career stage? So early 1 to 8 years, mid 9 to 20, or seasoned and later, 21 plus, or planning for and or retired. So we'll just a couple more seconds and we'll have Candace go ahead and close that and see what we have. Oh, we got quite a mix here.
Nice.
This is nice. All right.
Great.
All right. Well, we'll talk about everything then, won't we?
I will say too that I made up those categories. I think if you look and you think, I don't feel like I'm mid-career, that's totally okay. It was just giving us an idea of sort of where people were.
Great. So tell us more about your work at Boeing and how you develop leaders there, Carmen.
Yeah, so I've been with Boeing for about 3.5 years. I joined from Honeywell, and I'd been with Honeywell for a little over 13. And ironically, had an aerospace background, which seems a little interesting when you think about my degree being in public relations. So like Mike mentioned, I don't think there is a standard career path that exists. And if there was one for me, I certainly didn't follow it. So the way we develop leaders, we've got about 30 people on my team, and we focus on really a pretty large scope that starts at foundational management and kind of leadership concepts, all the way through executive leadership and really CEO succession planning. That's a big thing for Wall Street. They want to know who's going to be the next in line when you've got leadership changes at that level. So more about the how we develop leaders. We are using right now a theory that's called vertical development. And the thing that's really interesting about it is that if you think horizontally, that is gaining additional skills and knowledge or building your capability. How you lead and how you develop is the vertical side. So it's really increasing your capacity to lead. And so we're really shaping a lot of our leadership offerings and programs around that vertical development theory, and it's really taking hold. And we like the direction that we're going with that.
All right. And I know that you're certified with Hogan assessment. Is Hogan something that you all use there at Boeing?
We do. We do. It's actually one of the only assessments that we use both for selection in some cases, as well as for development. That's really how we differentiate between the two. So Hogan has 5 components, but honestly, there's 3 that most people use when they're doing the assessment. So the first one is called the HPI. It's the personality inventory, Hogan personality inventory. They refer to that as the bright side. It is kind of how you show up, how you relate when you are at your best with people. The second one is called the HDS, which is the development survey, or that's the dark side. Maybe that's appropriate since it's May the 4th, it's Star Wars Day, that you have a dark side assessment. But that really talks about your derailers. What are the things that you may not be thinking about in a very regular context, but those are things that could really throw a wrench in your plans and might be something that you'd want to focus on and really kind of overcome those potential derailers. And then the last one is the motives, values, and personality inventory. That's kind of how you show up from the inside. So taken all together, the Hogan assessment is really a way that predicts likely behavior. So it does have that touch of personality, but the really interesting thing about it is that it's based on a lot of 360s. And so it's basically taken 360 data from years and years worth of compiling that data and making some good best guesses on how a person might show up in a certain job. That's the selection side of things. And then in the development, again, think about those derailers. What are the things that are going to throw me off that I want to think about before I move into any type of position? So that's how we use it at Boeing.
And so this Hogan assessment, can somebody take that who doesn't work with your company? Is that distinct to your company? Is a leadership one that's kind of out there that people can take, or?
People can absolutely take it. It is not something, well, let me say it this way. We have not customized it for Boeing. Other companies might and say, you know, we want it to assess these specific things, or we want to look at just a few key components that have been indicators for them. But we use the standard off-the-shelf Hogan assessments. Similar to what Mike was mentioning, this is one that requires someone to assess your results. That's one big thing with assessment. Some of them are kind of off the shelf. You get a report and you could read through it and make sense of it. This is one of those that you need somebody who's gone through that certification, because they're going to look at things that pair. And if you've got X on one part of the assessment and Y on the other, that might be an indicator. So it is something that anyone could go and take. In some cases, it might be customized for a company.
Gotcha. And so, and maybe we're talking about Hogan, or we're talking about some of these other assessments. Should they only be taken at like the beginning of a career? Can they be helpful at a mid-career level or a seasoned career level as well? And can you maybe share an example?
Yeah, I think you can take assessments at any point. And I really would define kind of overall assessments, at least within Boeing, is there's kind of two schools of thought. One of those schools of thought is give me all the assessments. People want to kind of learn from this one, and I took a nugget from that one, and I want to hear about this. And I actually had one of the employees that is on my team at Boeing send me basically like a CV, a portfolio of all the assessments that he had taken, and he put them all together. And he really loves learning and kind of, pulling again those nuggets of different assessments. The other school of thought is that you take a smaller number of assessments, but you repeat them over time. And so an example of that is a 360, where you're getting feedback from your boss, from your peers, if you're a manager, from people that work for you. And then if you take that again, 18 or 24 months later, it can give you an opportunity to see if you've grown. If you've grown or developed, or maybe a specific area that you were intentionally working on, what is the change that people around you have been able to perceive? So we've got quite a few assessments. And again, if we think for selection and for development, we have them at the team level. We also have them for individuals. So it's really a pretty big variety.
Great. With personality assessments, people might feel that the results don't really reflect how they really feel. Have you completed any assessments that didn't feel quite right to you? And what did you do?
I did. I took the MBTI pretty early in my career and actually was going through a certification process. And I reported as an extrovert, and it just didn't feel right. Now, people that meet me like this might think you can take all the air in the room. But the introvert extrovert is really where you get your energy. And for me, gaining that energy and kind of recharging is not from work in a room at a party or from going out and kind of being social. Mike and I would be opposites in that case, because the social part is not where I really gain that energy. What it did help me understand is that the personality of an assessment like MBTI really is preference. And if I were to ask everybody to do a little, exercise and write their signature with whatever their dominant hand was, then do the same thing and write your signature with your non-dominant hand, you could do it. It's probably not going to look very good, and it might not be seen as, legally binding on certain contracts. But the idea is that handedness is a preference, just like how something shows up on the Myers-Briggs. So if you're, kind of forced to, or if you have to adapt, you learn how to flex. If you broke your dominant hand, you'd figure out how to write with a non-dominant hand. So for me, it was saying, okay, I know I don't really like doing this kind of, going out, and I did sales for a while. I learned from that. I don't like sales. I'm not the kind of person that's going to enjoy that. So I do think understanding kind of what that natural preference is really is just a data point for you. It means that you may have to work a little harder to feel comfortable in doing things that are outside of that scope. But even my work right out of school, I went into public relations and was doing things in the media. Definitely not something that you would automatically associate with somebody who's feeling introverted.
So at Boeing, do you use personality assessments for selection? And are there dangers in relying too much on personality assessment results? That's a mouthful.
We do not use personality assessments for selection. The kinds of assessments that we would use for selection are things like demonstrated skills. Think about when you fly on a Boeing aircraft, you want to make sure that the person who was building that aircraft had the certification and could demonstrate their ability to go and do that. That's the kind of thing that we want to test for. But if you think about the development side of things, or even a personality, diversity makes our world much better. So we want to encourage diversity of thought just as much as the other types of diversity that we might see. So again, thinking about how someone can flex, I wouldn't want to have a team of all extroverts. For those of you that are extroverts, we'd never get anything done. We'd probably just talk about things all day long. So I think having that balance, again, if somebody is learned what their natural preference is and they can go beyond that and kind of feel comfortable in different spaces, that's, I think, what creates the diversity we're looking for.
All righty, well, great. Well, thank you, Carmen. So let's go ahead and have this be our general Q&A session time. So if we can go ahead and have Mike and Michelle join us again. And then if you're not currently speaking, then we'll go ahead and have everybody mute. So we'll do that. But our first question, I think we're going to go ahead and give it to Mike. What advice would you have for an alum who is starting a new career path after 20 plus years?
Yeah, and that's becoming more common, I think, as people either, again, maybe the pandemic shut down their industry completely and they need to start over. I've talked to a few people, for example, who've been hospitality industry, but they decided to switch into healthcare because that seemed more stable. I think just allowing yourself the time and space to really dig deep and look at your interests, your personality, your values, your skills, just taking a comprehensive look. I think probably the worst thing someone could do would be to jump from one career to another in terms of industry without really spending the legwork to talk to folks, do information interviews. Job shadow would be even better. It's hard to do right now. Before making that change, if they want to make a decision that is good for them long term. That's what I would suggest. And we can help you through that for free at the Career Center. So come see us.
The Career Center is your friend, whether you are a student or an alum. Alrighty, so Michelle, I think I'm going to send this one to you. We had a question come in. Does Myers-Briggs provide a good indication if you'll be a good fit for a particular job or career? I once got denied for a job interview based on my Myers-Briggs and was curious if it was a founded thought process for them. And maybe Carmen, you may want to add something to that too.
Yeah, I think I'm with some of the things Carmen just spoke about. Like, I have not had experience where that would be used in job selection, and personally don't think it should be. So I wonder if that was a one-off with that company. But I do think Carmen's right. When you're looking at teams and you're looking at people who can join your team, some of those skill areas that could come out through your Myers-Briggs, such as being an extrovert or an introvert, those can play into just your style of work. And I think that could come into play through your hiring, just with what you're sharing in the interview. So I don't know, Carmen may have something else to add to that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that some companies really look for fit when it comes to the culture of a team and things like that. But if I were talking to that person, I would say, it may be an indicator of fit, but it's not the only thing that's going to, really maybe enhance your team. So I always cringe a little bit when I hear someone has used a personality assessment for that selection. But if we try to give them a little credit, maybe they were going for a cultural fit and they were trying to think about the kind of person that would work, more collaboratively with their team. Fingers crossed, that's what they were thinking.
All right, and I know we talked to Mike about the alum who was starting the new career path after 20 plus years. This is a kind of somewhat similar. One alum wrote in that she graduated from Missouri State in 2014, has been a homemaker for the past 4 years. Do you have advice for stay-at-home moms returning to the workforce? And I think that you had kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but did you have anything else to add to that?
You're talking to me, Shelley?
I'm sorry, Mike, yes.
Oh, okay.
We'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, spending that time before jumping back into the workforce, really maybe taking an inventory of your skills that you have, also any transferable skills that you've picked up along the way, which I'm sure there are many. And I think, just maybe getting help from, whether it's from us at the Career Center or someone else, to kind of brush up on interviewing skills, networking skills, resume assistance, doing all of those things maybe before transitioning back. But obviously that's a very common life event. And so it's certainly nothing to shy away from, I don't think. Usually, a couple of the alums I've worked with, I think it was more of a matter of helping build their confidence, that they in fact do have a lot to offer. And in this one alum instance I'm thinking about, we talked about doing some volunteer work at a couple local not-for-profits who a few months later actually offered her a full-time job, and she was super excited about it. But she just lacked the confidence because she'd been out of the workforce, but it was more than 5 years. It was more like 15 to 20. So, yeah.
Well, one thing I would add to that is we've got a program at Boeing, just to give you an example, that's called Return Flight. And it is a targeted program to help people who have been out of the workforce. It could be that they were raising a family, or maybe they had elder care issues that they were looking at. So I think that is becoming more common. We're actually seeing a lot of government organizations that are also sponsoring that type of support to help people re-enter the workforce. And then there's so much of a focus on upskilling and reskilling that I think companies like Boeing will not only help you get back into the workforce, but then make sure that you've got the current skills that you need to be successful.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is a lot of times companies will train you to do the work. It has to do with your attitude and your approach to things. So like Mike said, a lot of times my experience as a career coach with people who've been out of the workforce is it is about confidence and being able to show what you can bring to the table. They can train you how to do the job, but they want somebody that's going to be a team player with a good attitude. And a lot of times you can bring that to the table yourself.
Great. Alrighty, we had a question come in. I think Carmen, this one might be geared towards you. This individual is curious of what some of the defined derailers found in the Hogan's development assessment might be.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example that tends to stand out to me. And one of those is ambitious. And if you think about someone being ambitious, it can be a great, if somebody is an entrepreneur, it can be great for you to be ambitious. If you are a person on a team who needs to collaborate, and it's really the benefit of the team for everyone to work together, that ambition may be seen as a derailer. If it is something that you put your own success or your own achievements before that of the team, maybe it could be perceived that you're going to take credit for the work of a team. That I think is a good example, because there's a lot of folks, that have this kind of competitive spirit and really want to go and do great things. But if it's too far, it can be seen as a derailer. So that's one of the examples that I typically talk about that shows up in that Hogan assessment.
Right. Another question that just came in. So 4 out of 5 of my top 5 strengths on the Strengths Quest are in the strategic thinking category. Is it common to have most of your top strengths in one category? And do you have any advice for building a variety of strengths? I'm just going to throw that out there for whoever is interested in taking it.
Yeah, I think that happens from time to time. I don't know the percentage of how common it is, but I think it says a lot about your personality when you fall stronger in one area. It doesn't mean you can't develop the strengths in another category, but it really shows what you're really strong at, and that's really where you need to put your focus. For example, one of the areas of Strengths Quest is competition, and I don't score very high in that. Now, I could foster the competition, I could try to enhance that skill, but it's not worth my time and energy to do that if I'm on a team with other people who have that skill. So can you look at the other 30 some talent areas and foster them? Absolutely, especially if ones that are in your top 10 or so, you could swing in that area a little bit to develop those further. But there may just be some areas that are just not strong for you. And that's okay, because there's going to be other people you work with that have those skills. And so being able to really focus on the strategic thinking, you're going to bring a lot to a team when you have those skills in your arsenal.
Great. Okay, Carmen, I've got one for you. How can supervisors use personality assessments to better manage their employees and help with their career growth?
I love this question. As I mentioned, I have 33 people on my team. We got a lot of different personalities that show up every single day when we work together. So just to give you a couple of ideas, and Michelle was talking about this, like in the MBTI, we'll use that as the example. So How people take in data. If I have a staff meeting and I've got all 33 people on that call, there's going to be people that want to pre-read. They want to get that information in advance so they can process it and be able to think about what questions they might ask. If we've got a balance of introverts and extroverts, I'm going to want to know that. So that way, if we're doing an activity, that the extroverts don't take up all the air in the room. They tend to think out loud. So it's not a bad thing, but it is making sure that maybe I'm selecting and calling on people that might not have raised their voices yet. So that's one way that we use those kind of personality assessments, and a manager can, to really help their team. From a development perspective, I think it's, like what Michelle was just giving that example, is thinking about what those strengths are. And if you realize that you've got a real strength in strategy, if I was talking to one of my team members and knew that they had that strategy, it might not be a good move for them to go work in one of our kind of call center environments. You're probably not going to create a lot of strategy there. So I think that's another good example to say, okay, if these are the strengths, is this something you want to go do? And it opens up the conversation, which as a leader, that's the biggest thing for me, is to open the conversation and have them do some exploration.
Great. And so if you have a team, is it better to have people that are completely different from each other working together? Or does that just create more chaos, as well as if you had all extroverts in the room taking up the air?
I think it's balanced. It could create some chaos, but sometimes really great innovations come from chaos. And so I want to have the diversity of thought. I want to know those processors, right? Give them a couple of days. They're going to be thinking about things that other people won't be able to come up with in the, just kind of spur of the moment. So I want the diversity in any kind of a team that I'm a part of, and a team that I'd lead.
And I was going to say, I think a lot of it is about the leader of the team, like Carmen said, and understanding who you're working with to be able to pull that team together. And for individuals to know themselves, then they know what they're going to add to that team, good and bad, when it becomes chaotic.
Mm-hmm. And we know that there are lots of different personality assessments that are out there. We just talked about a few today that our panelists have been experienced with. If there's maybe a couple of others that you all know of that you would want to suggest to people, we can throw those out there real quick.
I will share one, Shelley, that I used that gave me some insights. It was called the Harrison, and it is tending more towards the types of fields you might be interested in. It told me that I shouldn't do work with food and I shouldn't do work with driving. And so food truck, totally out for me. And it's also evidenced by the fact anytime I get on a road trip, like 30 minutes in, I need a nap. So there's some things like that. And again, you take some nuggets from it and say, great. I mean, these are some really good indicators. And even if they don't give you that career path for the rest of your life, take it for what it's worth and know, hey, no food truck for Carmen.
No food and driving, dangerous, dangerous. Alrighty, well,
Right.
Thank you panelists and attendees for joining us this afternoon. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today and felt that you received some great tips. Please watch for the follow-up email on Thursday coming from me with the recorded link of the session, some contact information from our panelists so you didn't get your question answered, and a survey link for feedback, and then also the link for the recording. If you have suggestions for future BearTalks topics, we do want to know what those are. And if you know a Missouri State alum who, even if it's yourself, if you think you'd be a great panelist, please let us know in that survey. Our next BearTalks webinar will be on Thursday, June 10th from noon to 1 p.m. Central Time with the topic entitled Investing 101, an introductory webinar on navigating the stock market and other investment opportunities. So thank you all again for being part of today's presentation, and have a great afternoon. See you later.